It was a most unusual performance. 40 members of the Jerusalem Symphony Orchestra, maintaining social distance, accompanied by the Haredi ultra-Orthodox singer Ziv Yechezkel, who sang the national anthem of the United Arab Emirates in Arabic. That performance embodied the excitement felt in Israel over the Abraham Accords. The same exuberance, of course, was felt on the other side. A new Glad Kosher restaurant opened in Dubai inside the world's tallest building. Emiratis and Israelis have placed ads inviting each other to come visit. Business deals are being made at a furious pace. This is what real peace is supposed to feel like. A genuine peace in which two peoples set aside their anger and bitterness, their hatred and fear, and choose instead to celebrate their common interests and to embrace each other as family. Who gets the credit for bringing together these two former enemies? According to one report I read, it is Jeremy Issacharoff. In 1994, while Issacharoff served as the number 3 diplomat at the Israeli embassy in Washington, he was approached by an American consultant who worked with the Gulf states. The consultant told him that the UAE wanted to purchase F-16s. They wanted to know, would Israel object? If you were Jeremy, how would you have responded? I know that if I were put in that position and asked that question, I would have said, yes, Israel most definitely will object. The UAE is Israel's sworn enemy, sworn to its destruction. Why on earth would Israel allow them to acquire the most sophisticated fighter jets in the world? That is how I would have responded. But I'm not Jeremy Issacharoff. Instead, Jeremy told the consultant that Israel wanted to discuss the matter face-to-face with the Emiratis and find out exactly how they intended to use the aircraft. A first meeting of sworn enemies could have become very tense, but at this meeting the conversation just flowed. The two sides quickly realized that their countries had a lot of common interests. Iran, for one, but also a host of other areas, including renewable energy and water management and medical technology, and a shared interest in entrepreneurship and innovation as drivers of economic transformation. Not long after that first encounter, then Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin was in a meeting at the Pentagon and was asked about the Emiratis' desire to purchase F-16s. Rabin replied, "We will not object." That was a pivotal moment. Through Jeremy Issacharoff's meeting and Rabin's consent, a trust was established between the two countries that made sustained dialogue possible. The two nations started cooperating on intelligence. That same year, the UAE stopped enforcing the secondary and tertiary Arab boycotts that had forbid doing business with companies that dealt with Israel. The Emiratis even began engaging in direct, clandestine trade with Israel in violation of their own primary boycott, a trade that this year passed $1 billion. Israeli products were being packed in unmarked boxes and shipped to the UAE over land via Jordan. Many Israeli businessmen now travel regularly to the UAE, allowed into the country with their Israeli passports, all with the Emirates' tacit consent. By the time Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, president of the UAE, was joined by the leader of Bahrain at the White House, many Emiratis in the streets had already begun to see the commonalities and embrace the announcement of peace. This past May, Israel and the UAE signed a multi-billion-dollar free trade agreement with a stated target of increasing annual bilateral trade to more than $10 billion over the next 5 years. The trade agreement is the largest ever between Israel and an Arab country. The signing opened a new chapter in the history of the Middle East, according to the Emirati trade minister. Our agreement will accelerate growth, create jobs, and lead to a new era of peace, stability, and prosperity across the region. I don't know if many of you have been following these developments, but this is an incredible piece in the story of the modern state of Israel. Approaching the 75th anniversary of its establishment in May of 1948, Israel, as we know, is a remarkable country. Having made a name for itself in medicine, technology, agriculture, irrigation, immigrant absorption, and in so many other ways, There is a great deal about Israel which we and Jews throughout the world can celebrate when it comes to the beloved achievements of our homeland. If you have spent time in Israel, you know what an incredible mix it is of historical and present day. As Rabbi Adam Greenwald has said, every inch of this tiny country is soaked in history. The past is everywhere, from Neolithic cave drawings in Mount Carmel to worn smooth paving stones where the prophets walked, to synagogues where the mystics taught, to fields through which the ancient armies of Babylonia, Assyria, Greece, and Rome all marched. When I was there last April, I rode for the first time the new high-speed rail system from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and days later walked the ramparts of the old city, peering out at the new city of Jerusalem from the walls built by the Ottoman Emperor Sultan Suleiman I in the 1500s. That tension between old and new is at the heart of Israel's story. She is an ancient land whose roots stretch back to the beginning of time, to the beginning of human civilization, the birthplace of ideas that shape the world. She is also one of the newest nations of the earth, only 74 years old. In 1909, Zionist pioneers established a new town on the beach in the shadow of the timeless port of Jaffa, from which Jonah fled, God, only to be swallowed by a big fish. We'll read that story later this afternoon. They called their settlement Tel Aviv, blending the word for the archaeological remains of a time long ago with the word for springtime, the blossoming of renewed life. They chose the name wisely. It continues to be a potent symbol of this unique land. To understand Israel today, to appreciate her successes, the odds that she has overcome, and to be able to love her while her enemies and her detractors accuse her of all sorts of misdeeds, one certainly has to be familiar with her history. I won't take us back this afternoon to the biblical period, to the years when Israel was ruled by judges and kings, cajoled by her prophets, nor to the era when the Greeks or the Romans exerted their rule upon her, even though there is much to be learned about Israel from studying these periods. Instead, I want to focus on the 18th, 19th, and early 20th centuries for a few moments. Here are a few historical facts that must be understood. The Muslim Ottoman Empire controlled the land of Israel for hundreds of years. Relatively few Jews lived in the Holy Land during those centuries. The Ottoman Empire could very easily have established a Muslim country in the land of Israel with Jerusalem as its capital city. The thought never occurred to them. Palestine was a poor backwater of little significance. Jerusalem was an old, decrepit city that no one, except the Jews, cared very much about. There was no call for a Palestinian state and no claim that Jerusalem should be a capital of a Muslim country. Between 1948 and 1967, Jordan controlled the West Bank and the Old City of Jerusalem. Egypt controlled Gaza. Neither Jordan nor Egypt ceded 1 inch of territory to Palestinian Arab rule. Neither suggested the need for a Palestinian country, nor took any steps in the direction of creating a Palestinian state. Jordan did not declare Jerusalem as a capital city of the Palestinians. In June 1967, Israel defeated her Arab enemies in the remarkable Six-Day War. In the process, Israel took control of the Sinai, the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and the Old City of Jerusalem. In making peace with Egypt, Israel ceded the Sinai to Egypt. In attempting to create conciliatory gestures with the Palestinian Arabs, Israel ceded much of the West Bank and Gaza to the Palestinian Authority. Consider then, Israel is the only country in the world to have given territory to the Palestinian Arabs. Today, the Palestinians seek to have a country of their own, and I have no qualms about the establishment of a Palestinian state alongside of Israel. Neither does Yair Lapid, the current Israeli prime minister. Speaking to the United Nations General Assembly on September 22nd, Prime Minister Lapid said, Israel's economic and military strength allows us to protect ourselves, but it also allows us something else, to strive for peace with the entire Arab world and our closest neighbors, the Palestinians. An agreement with the Palestinians based on 2 states for 2 people is the right thing for Israel's security, for Israel's economy, and for the future of our children. Peace is not a compromise, he said. It is the most courageous decision that we can make. Lapid went even further in his pronouncement concerning the possibility of an agreement with Gaza. He seemed to be extending to the people of Gaza an olive branch, while he called on its residents to declare a permanent ceasefire and on Hamas to return Israeli captives as a predicate for peace. He did not mention a demand that Israel has made for decades, a declarative recognition of Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state. I say from here to the people of Gaza, we are ready to help you build a better life, to build an economy, he said. We presented a comprehensive plan to help rebuild Gaza. We only have one condition, said Lapid: stop firing rockets and missiles at our children. Put down your weapons, and there will be no restrictions. Some will say that these are just words. They're coming from a prime minister who may have less than a month left in office if he and a coalition of partners cannot garner a majority of the votes in next month's national elections. They mean little and do not suggest that change is imminent. And yet, words matter. Words matter a great deal. On Yom Kippur, we acknowledge that words matter so much they can have great import and tremendous consequences. I worry a great deal about the words that are being used to depict Israel as some kind of monster and pariah. Just 2 weeks ago, Representative Rashida Tlaib, a Michigan Democrat who is a Palestinian American, who happens to be the only member of Congress who opposes Israel's self-definition as a Jewish state, said that there was no room in the progressive movement of this country for supporters of what she called Israel's apartheid government. I want you all to know that among progressives, it's become clear that you cannot claim to hold progressive values, yet back Israel's apartheid government. And we will continue to push back and not accept that you are progressive except for Palestine, Tlaib said. Fortunately, there were many who took to their microphones and Twitter accounts to respond to her inflammatory accusations. Representative Richie Torres of New York, who is gay and who has extolled the protection of LGBTQ rights in Israel, took aim at some of Tlaib's other stances. There's nothing progressive about advocating for the end of Israel as a Jewish state, he said on Twitter. Nothing progressive about opposing the Abraham Accords, which promote peace. Nothing progressive about opposing Iron Dome, which protects civilians from indiscriminate rocket fire. And Representative Debbie Wasserman Schultz of Florida tweeted, "The outrageous progressive litmus test on Israel by Rashida Tlaib is nothing short of anti-Semitic. Proud progressives do support Israel's right to exist as a Jewish and a democratic state. Suggesting otherwise is shameful and dangerous, divisive rhetoric, not leading to peace." Today, unfortunately, it is Tlaib's critical view of Israel which is widely shared. Rabbi Ed Farber suggests that we all know the statistics and our own eyes and ears tell us that the next generation are feeling a strong disconnect from Israel. We sense this already in our bones and in our hearts, but perhaps we downplayed it, thinking it to be simply a phase, part of the normal rebelliousness of each generation. They will find their way back, we rationalized, and if push comes to shove, they will support Israel in her struggle for survival against the forces aligned against her. The terrorist country Iran, the terror organizations on her borders armed with 100,000 missiles, Hezbollah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad. We rationalize, yes, they support far-left progressive groups which call for the end of the Jewish state, but they only support them because of their social justice work. On Israel, they won't stand with them. So we have young Jews joining and supporting organizations that support solutions to the Israel-Palestine conflict, which call for the end of the Jewish state. They support organizations and politicians who criticize Israel for defending herself against thousands of missiles launched at her civilian population. While millions of Jews were running for bomb shelters with missiles flying over their heads in May of 2021, some of them crashing into Israeli homes, businesses, and schools, Arab, Christian, and Jewish, some of them killing Israelis, they faulted Israel for destruction and death in Gaza without a word of empathy for the 9 million Jewish, Arab, Christian, and Druze citizens of Israel. We did not hear their outrage over the missiles from Gaza that left Israelis hiding in bomb shelters, fleeing from their cars lest they be hit and explode, or over Israelis who suffered broken legs or heart attacks while running for safety. There is no question that we regret the loss of life in Gaza. Of course we do. But no army in the world takes more precautions, makes greater efforts than Israel's defense forces to prevent civilian damage. The one report from the UN that said Israel didn't do that was later repudiated by the very author of the report, who admitted that he wrote it before he had the evidence, and he was too influenced by Hamas reports, which turned out to be false, and he was pressured by the media. You may recall that over 90 future American rabbis signed a letter that fiercely criticized Israel during this episode without once mentioning the thousands of missiles launched at Israel's civilians, without once mentioning the terror of a young mother and daughter trying to figure out how to get her infant baby and her grandmother into different bedrooms in the house to the bomb shelter in time. Israel was so careful in her bombings of Hamas targets, so deliberate before any attack was launched, canceling important targets before the embedded civilian populations were alerted, that they delayed for hours by warning the people in the vicinity to leave and take shelter, and therefore, in protecting Gazan citizens, the war lasted longer than it should have, and more Israeli lives were lost as a result. There was more destruction in Israel of both property and Israel's economy. But Israel was willing to do this in order to avoid as much as possible civilian losses in Gaza. Should not these rabbis in training be singing the praises of Israel's army for the restraint that they showed? Should they not have been praising the Israeli people for their willingness to suffer a bit longer to prevent additional trauma in Gaza? They and so many other American Jews were willing to believe the worst about their fellow Jews in Israel, to take the word of Hamas over the word of the chief of staff of Israel's armed forces. How did we get to the sad state of affairs? How could this have happened? How have we arrived in this place where Israel is criticized as though she is some authoritarian country which doesn't give a hoot about her Arab citizens and is willing to indiscriminately take Arab lives? Of course, there is what to criticize about Israel. There are problems that they are not handling well, and there are problems that we in this country are not handling well. No country is above criticism. But young people must first be taught to love Israel, to love their fellow Jews, to understand the incredible greatness of this country, the miraculous accomplishments that surpass, in some ways, even the splitting of the Red Sea. After that, you can and must point to Israel's mistakes, the problems that need fixing to make her an even better country, an even more just country. What country in the world doesn't need to become better and more just? So many of us have been to Israel. That provides us with a certain perspective that many of Israel's critics simply do not have. We know what it means to have to secure every building, every bus, every street from terror. We understand that you don't walk into a mall in Israel without having your bags checked. We understand that every Israeli looks for suspicious packages in the streets and on the buses and in the lobbies. We get it. But this is not necessarily understood, not felt the same way by many of the next generation. Too many haven't even been to Israel. That's why Birthright, the single most successful program in teaching young people to love and understand Israel and to want to improve her, was created. We have not prepared the next generation for any of this because we didn't instill the requisite knowledge or an ample amount of love for our beloved homeland. What we need to do is sing Israel's praises, tell her story, point to the miracle of the ingathering of the exiles from all over the world, and then we can say a few things about which it needs improvement, and then we can partner with our allies in Israel to work towards those improvements. That's what we have failed to do. What we need to do is remind every young Jew of this. Israel brought home Holocaust survivors when she became a state, absorbed 800,000 Jewish refugees from Arab countries which pushed them out, and Israel did it in spite of being dirt poor herself at the time. Israel absorbed 100,000 Ethiopian Jews, spending tens of millions to get them out and bring them home. What other country does that? Israel absorbed 1 million Russians fleeing the oppression of Russia, and many more are coming today, escaping Putin and his merciless war on the Ukraine. Israel pulled off the most daring rescue of Jews at Entebbe, stunning the entire world. Israel fought off multiple Arab nations' attempts to destroy the state, sacrificing over 23,000 of her youth to protect this country. Israel offered the Palestinians a state of their own 3 times already, only to be answered with intifadas that killed over 2,000 Israelis and sent tens of thousands of missiles into the country. No, they, for the most part, this younger generation, doesn't know this, or most of this, and so that's our fault. We didn't succeed in telling the story the same way that we told the story of the Exodus. We need to focus on teaching love of Torah, love of Judaism, and love of Israel. None are without fault. None are perfect. All have warts, but we teach them to love family, and what family is perfect and without warts. If we value something and want our children to appreciate it and make it part of their lives, we need to teach them first and foremost to love it. Otherwise, why should they care about it? That must be the guiding principle of education in the home and in our schools. On Yom Kippur, this is the Al-Chet, the confessional that we need to recite and then focus on in order that we do better. I share with you Rabbi Farber's version of Vidui. Al-Chet shechatanu, for the sin of failing to teach our children to love the Jewish state and their fellow Jews. Al-Chet shechatanu, for the sin of not teaching them the truth of Israel's heroism and greatness and generosity in sharing her expertise with the world, whether it be her portable hospitals and rescue teams that are always the first to arrive anywhere in the world where disaster strikes, as they did at the disaster at Surfside, or sharing with the world incredible medical and technological advancements. Al-Chet shechatanu lefanecha, for the sin of lacking empathy with our fellow Jews under constant threat of terror and missile strikes, and avoiding mention of Israel's enemies who target children, women, the elderly, and the innocent. Al-Chet shechatanu, for the sin of placing blame only on Israel for the failure to arrive at a 2-state solution, which on 3 occasions has been offered to the Palestinians, opportunities that they should have taken to establish their own state. For all these sins, but most of all for the sin of not instilling love for Israel, love of empathy for our fellow Jews in too many of the next generation, forgive us and pardon us, but only if we dedicate ourselves to correcting the mistakes in the future, and only if we build an American Jewish community that loves and supports Israel while partnering with her to create an even more noble society. That is our sacred task. That is our holy obligation. May God grant us the wisdom, strength, and most of all the courage to accomplish this holy work. As we prepare to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the establishment of the modern state of Israel, let us pledge to support her with our dollars, with our visits, through organizations like Israel Bonds and the Masorti movement and all of our sister and brothers who work on behalf of this country each and every day, through organizations like Leket and the Israel Goldstein Youth Village, those who take in children and adults, all in need of help. We have work to be done, and we can do it together. If you haven't visited Israel, then go to Israel. Go this May with the Federation of Greater Philadelphia, who has organized a marvelous mission to celebrate Israel's independence. And if you can't go in May, talk to me about going next December. I'd love another congregational trip. This is my Yom Kippur prayer, that we should establish our own belief in the future of Israel by supporting her with every fiber of our being. May it be God's will. Amen.